So it's now 12:05 and I would like us to start the session. For today's session, it's a wrap up on empathy, and it's the first stage of design thinking. So for the last few weeks, we've been looking at design thinking. We've initially taken an overview on what design thinking is. We've had some extensive discussions on design thinking, and now we've started looking at the various stages of design thinking. And in my view, design thinking helps us to solve problems. And if we are looking at problems in different shapes or form, more specifically within product development, project management, business analysis, the focus is, can we understand the problem? And if we understand the problem, what are the tools that will help us in solving the problem? Initially, we said design thinking is a mindset. And in that mindset, it's got a set of tools. And the tools are what we've been looking at in the last few weeks. So last week we looked at empathy mapping, but in this session we're wrapping up on the area of empathy mapping, and then we'll finish off with the customer journey map and start preparing for our next area, which is to define, with all the nuggets or all the information we've obtained from the customer, we want to define the problem and start preparing to use those to produce ideas. There will be multiple ideas, but we'll have to prioritize the ideas, then produce a prototype, and then finally test and validate that particular prototype. So what is empathy in itself? Empathy is considered to be being aware, being sensitive of other people around you and putting yourself in their shoes. That's the key thing about empathy. And a UX designer, a design thinker, would have to feel that way about the customers, the users they are working for. And this quote really summarizes everything we are looking at about the tools with design thinking. Einstein said, if I were given an hour in which to do a problem upon which my life depended on, he would spend 40 minutes studying it and 15 minutes reviewing it and 5 minutes solving it. And all the time he wants to understand the problem, we will consider that to be the empathize, the define, ideate, and then he gets a solution to work on. Once he gets that particular solution to work on, that allows him to have the opportunity to solve the right problem. Most often people will jump into solving a problem, and that's not what the customer expects from you. So we should spend more time in the first stages, which will enable us to solve the customer's problems. Yeah. So the empathize phase is what we've been looking at. We'll summarize it in this particular session and then move into the define and ideation phase.
Measure up your house.
It's still the same. Why do they need to do it?
The empathize, when we took an initial look at design thinking, we also discussed design sprints. And what we would look at from this particular slide is the design sprint enables us to what? Understand, explore, and materialize a problem for the customer. The first stage would be in the empathize phase. We don't do it once and so let's forget it. We are done. That's a waterfall approach. The design thinking as well is an iterative approach, building back to the agile ways of working. Iteratively, as we engage with our users' world will change, things will change, and we would always come back to understanding the initial information we gathered about that particular user. So design thinking in its way, applying design sprint, which is a 4-day stages of gathering information about the, let's say, understanding the user, exploring the user's needs, building a solution, a potential solution for the user, testing, validating it, and then going back to the user to seek more feedback, and then going through the same process, you realize it's iterative. It's not just, I've done the 4-day design sprint, that is it. No, you will go back through all the stages until you deliver a solution that is fit for purpose for your customer. So design sprints or design thinking is not a waterfall approach. It's an iterative approach, and you will go back through the process until the customer has accepted the solution. And even when the solution is with the customer, you'll still be going back to the customer to take more feedback. These are the steps we've identified. Why am I going through all the stages again? This particular session wraps up our Empathise phase. We would not be going, we would come back to some of the steps within the Empathise phase. But in our series, this session is the final look at the Empathise. And in the define phase, we'll pick out some of the tools we discussed in the Empathise phase to help us with the define, ideate, prototype, validate, and test. And over time, I've come to use this particular slide a lot when I'm thinking about design thinking. We'll plan, which includes understanding our stakeholders, having an understanding of the situation. Then we will come to the Empathise. In the Empathise, in some of our previous sessions, we talked about personas, interviews, empathy maps. Today's session, we're looking at customer journey maps, and that will be the last part of Empathise. So you would not be hearing about Empathise in the follow-up series. So Empathise or discovery. What are some of the tools that we would use in the Empathise and discovery phase? We talked about the BOSCARD. We'll produce a research plan or a business analysis plan. We'll develop a persona. We would interview. We'll produce empathy maps. And with the empathy maps, we would use workshops to produce such documents. And then in producing customer journey maps as well, we would use workshops. I'll talk about interviews, I'll talk about workshops, and then we would summarize the customer journey map too. And then that's the end of our session on Empathise. So in the last session, someone asked me about the BOSCARD. So I've produced something that I'll be sharing to everyone who wants it, and you can look at how you can use the BOSCARD. The BOSCARD is an acronym, which is background, objective, scope, constraints, assumptions, risk, and dependencies. When I started as a business analyst, somewhere 2011, every piece of work you give me, I want to be able to categorize it in this columns. What's the background? Is there any business case? Is there any document that I can always go to and have a better understanding of the work I am working on? What are the objectives for the work I have to do? Is there any clear objectives? Definitely it could be in the business case, or it could be in a strategy document. And if I understand objectives clearly, when I'm in workshops and I'm in meetings, I'm able to discuss it clearly with the stakeholders who attend. I've seen situations where we've been in workshops and stakeholders who've attended have no clear understanding of the objectives and why they've been asked to come to such workshops. So when I have a clear understanding of the workshops, sometimes I put it on the post-it and leave it there. And when people come in, they can always go and see, oh, this is the objectives, this is why we are here. And believe me, it's always brought people's focus and aligned them throughout the entire session. So if you are running any workshop, any activity, and I continuously use this document, not only as a business analyst, as a trainer and a coach, I continuously use this document, and it's a good guide. What's the scope of work? What's to be done? And when you've got that list of what needs to be done, what are the priorities? We can't do everything. So we need to have what's in scope and what's out of scope. Clearly, if you have that understanding, it will help you manage that work. What are the constraints? What are the assumptions? What are the risks? What are the deliverables? So I'll pass this document around if you need it. We've talked about interviews. These are the key things I would like to remind you about interviews. Before you go into any interview session when conducting your design thinking process, or not conducting the design thinking, doing your own business analysis piece of work, as a trainer who's trained a lot of BAs, trained those taking the diploma in business analysis, helped with coached people going into the oral workshops. When you ask me questions about interviews, this is the key thing I'll tell you to remember. The first stage of an interview is you need to make research. Do you understand the situation? It's similar to having the BOSCARD. The BOSCARD would help you. The background will help you with your interviews. You plan for the interviews. In planning, you need to book rooms. You need to make sure that the person who's going to attend the workshop, you've made them aware, and you've started devising questions, areas that you would like to ask them as part of the plan. And you prepare for the workshop, you prepare for the interview. The worst thing you can do is to go into an interview unprepared, not having your questions, not knowing how to engage with the stakeholder you've invited, not knowing how to keep eye contact and to write notes. You would always do well if you prepare for your interview sessions. You conduct the interview sessions, produce outcomes, validate them, and review your interview process. As today is a wrap-up session, I'll touch on a few things and then I'll take some questions before we close the session. We talked about workshops and we've got a video on workshops. I would like you to go and watch the videos on workshops. It's now 1:15, so I would delve more into the customer journey maps for today. So I'll send the slides on delivering workshops remotely and how you can engage your stakeholders when they attend remote workshops. Now let's look at empathy maps. Last week we said it's a collaborative visualization tool used to articulate what we know about a particular type of user. It helps us capture important information about that particular user. And it's because we've done the persona, we can add the empathy map to the persona document. Yeah. If we've produced the empathy map, what's the next tool we would be producing? The next tool we will use will be our customer journey maps. Why do we need an empathy map? It helps us build a better understanding of the user. A better understanding of the user. Is the persona not good enough? The persona tells us some aspects about the user, but when we start looking at the user and the product, the empathy maps goes further in telling us more about the user and the product. So we've produced our persona to know the customer. We've produced our empathy map to understand the persona and the product. It helps us to have a common understanding among our various teams, and we can always use this document as a reference point. If I had an empathy map, I'll take it into an interview so that when the stakeholder asks me questions, I can use the empathy map to tell them more about the user and the product so that will build our common understanding. These are the areas that the empathy map covers: what the customer says, what they think, how do they feel, and what they are doing. And all of this will be captured in a workshop session to help us understand that particular user. Here's the outcome of an empathy mapping session, and in a workshop, or you can do it online and get people to just add things to the sticky board. After that, you could align items which are duplicates, items which are repeated. You could remove them from the table, and then make sure that what you have is a better understanding of the customer engaging with the product, a better understanding of how the customer would engage with the product. Do we need all these tools? Each tool tells us a different view of the customer. We'll look at our final tool within Empathise, and that is the customer journey map. The customer journey map is a visual representation of every experience your customers have with you. It helps you tell the story of the customer's experience with your brand from original engagement into a long-term relationship. How can I build a customer journey map that reflects all the touch points with that particular customer? First, I have my persona. I really know my customer. Second, I've done some empathy maps. Third, I've done some interviews. Prior to that, I've got my BOSCARD and I know the scope of work. Using the customer journey map will tell me the happy path, the alternate paths, the various scenarios, and other things I need to take into consideration when I am engaging with this particular customer. We would use a workshop session to produce a customer journey map, and it tells us about the various stages and the various systems, the various tools, and how they engage with the customer. How would I produce a comprehensive customer journey map? First, I need to know my persona. And it's the first step we've talked about. Do we know whom our customer is? Second, let's understand their goals. And the persona document can help us understand the goals of that particular customer. Why would they buy from us and not go to another person? And what makes us important to that particular customer? So all these things would enable us manage our relationship with the customer and to deliver a solution that meets their needs. Thirdly, what are their touch points? A customer's touch points are in many forms. A customer can engage with you via your website, through social media, face-to-face. Well, in this day of the pandemic, the face-to-face medium is not as encouraging, but things are being relaxed for us to continue with the face-to-face discussions. Then you've got online, which could be through your mobile phone, through a call, and customers can also engage with you through apps. Customers can also engage with you through probably third parties, where you've produced either a document article and the customers have found those, and that's made them touch points with you. And the touch points are so many that if you can map out the various touch points and identify the customer's pain points on those touch points, that can help you align the customer towards achieving the goals, being the buyer's goal or your goals. Every business is in there to make profit or to make a revenue. And if your goals are to get the customer to buy, understanding their touch points, understanding their pain points would help you align your goals and their goals. If you don't understand the customer's touch points and you don't understand their pain points, then you'll be missing the mark. Once you've identified the pain points and the touch points, you can now prioritize and fix some of the items that stops the customer from buying or using your product. Why do we prioritize? We can't work on everything. We need to identify things that would help us engage better with the customer. And if you can identify those key things, that would help you fix the problems the customer is having, and then you can iteratively update and improve the entire process. Here is an example of a customer journey map, and you're mapping the customer's journey. You can use the step-by-step approach, or you can also identify the various systems. Does it help? Yes, I would say the customer journey map helps. A version of it we tend to produce quite a lot is the process map. But the process map is considered as a low-level state of the customer journey maps, because in the customer journey maps, it's got many processes that are involved that you would have to draw out from the customer journey map. The customer journey map is high level, the process map is low level, and in the customer journey map, you could find hundreds of processes involved in it. So what would I draw first? I'll draw the customer journey map, and then I'll identify the underlying processes that sit underneath the customer journey map. What are some of the outcomes from these exercises? I've done my personas, I've done my interviews, I've done my empathy maps, I've done my customer journey maps in workshops, in interviews, I've refined them. The key thing that would happen is you now understand your current state, and then it will help you work towards your future state. The current state is the personas you've drawn, the empathy maps, the customer journey maps, the scenarios, and you now know the entire situation very well. Then you can produce the future state. A question I was asked recently, William, do you have all the time to produce this? I said, not all the time would you. It's not often that you get all the time to produce all of this. But in certain situations, if we really want to spend time understanding our customer, we can use all these tools. And these tools are available. The ones that I would recommend you highly use will be the personas, the customer journey maps, and then the use case diagrams. Those three are the bread and butter of the business analyst. Then you can add your process map as an addition to understanding the customer's activities in the organization and outside of the organization. That would help you produce your various process maps to understand the current future state, the current state, and the possible future states. So to summarize, this has been, I've brought everything we've discussed about the Empathise phase into a 30-minute session. And I know it's not the best, and we won't do so much justice to all these tools within 30 minutes, but it's to jog your memories, for you to go back and say, all this have been discussed, by which ones can I use? First, start your activities with a BOSCARD. Produce personas. If you want to go into detail about the persona, produce a customer journey map. Fourthly, I said, if you want to go into detail about the personas, produce an empathy map. Then produce a customer journey map, which will help you with your happy paths and your alternate paths. And then you can produce use case diagrams, which would help you understand the problem. In our next session, we'll look at define and ideation, which is the next stage of our design thinking process. Any questions?
And William, I just wanted to ask, in regards to constructing a customer journey map, which tool will you recommend that we use? I normally use Visio.
Currently, Visio is the business analyst bread and butter. And if you're in a workshop to produce a customer journey map, your first stage or a low fidelity of your customer journey maps is you putting stickers on the wall to understand the whole journey. Once you've produced a low fidelity, you can now produce a high fidelity, which is your Visio mapping out the steps. So the first stage is the workshop session, and you can use Miro, Jamboard, and all the available online tools, and just stickers. I know currently workshops are not being encouraged, so you don't have the opportunity to bring people into workshops. So there are many other tools to create the low fidelity, and then you can go away and produce a high fidelity, which is a process map using Visio or any other tool that's available on the market. Visio seems to be the go-to tool for most business analysts.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, William. I just want to say thank you so much. This information is very useful. It's not a question, but I just want to say thank you very much.
Thank you, Izzy.
Thank you.
Any additions before we call it a day, or any subtractions?
Yes, William.
Yes, go ahead, Uwan.
Is there any sort of template? Because normally something has to start from somewhere anyways. Is there any kind of template like one could, like for the customer journey, that one could have a look at or have as a keep, and then that would help one?
Okay, I'll add the high. Let's look at the customer journey map, okay? The low fidelity is going into a workshop to engage with your stakeholders and tell them, look, this is the trigger and this is the end. And then once you understand the various stages, is you mapping out the process end to end. And I'll look into my toolbox and see if there's any template I'll share, and I'll add it to the slides and share it with everyone.
Fantastic. That'll be superb. Thanks very much, William. Thanks very much, William.
Thank you, Uwe. If we don't have any other questions, I think we passed our 12:30 mark, and it's been a pleasure to host you all. And I would like to wish you a wonderful day and see you as we discuss the next stage on define, which we'll spend at least 2 sessions on to understand that particular stage. Yeah.
Yeah, just last one. Will we get the slides as well that you just
Yes,
used?
I promise to send the slides around, and you would all have the slides. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll take a picture of the. I'll take a picture. If you want to join me and not make me feel lonely and say hi, that's also fine. However, I would like to thank you all for joining me today. Yeah.
Like a bird on a tree, I'm just sitting